Hi, I'm Sam Hoskins, and this is my Quickie Q200, and I want to talk to you a little bit about the epoxy wipe method of finishing a fiberglass airplane. This airplane has just passed 2,000 hours on it. Over the course of the years, I've replaced the back wing 3 times. The front wing had been replaced, the vertical fin. So I've done a lot of stuff on it over the years, new wheel pants, and I was always struggling to find a good way to finish the airplane and have a nice smooth finish on it before painting. So when we start off with a piece of fiberglass, as you know, it's going to be a rough surface where you see the weave, and the trick is to get it from this point, the rough surface, to the point where we have a nice smooth wing that's going to allow us to slide through the air quickly enough. I think it was 2005, a fellow named Corey Bird brought his one-of-a-kind aircraft called Symmetry to Oshkosh, and really it was the most perfect airplane I've ever seen. The finish was absolutely incredibly flawless. All the joints were beautiful, just a great airplane. And later on in a subsequent article, I think it was Kit Planes magazine, Corey talked about the method that he used to achieve this finish, and he had come up with a method called Epoxy Wipe. And so that's what I'm going to talk about today. Cut. Over the years, there's been a number of ways developed to people try to fill in the weave on the aircraft and get a good finish, and nothing has really seemed that great. The original plans that Bert Rutan wrote in, he talked about a fill in the low spots kind of a method, and there's a lot of, they use feather fill back at the end, and a couple of products have come out on the market. They're epoxy that already has the micro balloons mixed in. I think it's called Superfill, a variety of automotive body products. But the thing is, all these methods really don't do a great job. And one of the problems as people are doing their finishing on it is there's pinholes to be dealt with, pinholes and scratches. And so people do some work on the plane and then think they're at a certain level on the wings and all, and they find out they have a lot of pinholes left or scratches, and they go back and they work on that, and that kind of disturbs the epoxy finish in other areas, and it makes it more difficult. And so they put stuff on and sand it off, and put it on and sand it off. And I remember reading in some of our newsletters from the Quickie Builders guys, fill and sand, fill and sand, fill and sand, fill and sand, like it's some sort of a big long process. You're supposed to do 20 coats of this, which turns out all to be incorrect. So this method is going to take us from a raw surface to a fine surface in really a short period of time, using a minimum amount of materials and a minimum amount of effort. The tools that we're going to use, I'll go through that first. For the finishing, I like to use the West system. This stuff sands great. It cures up fast. We use the slow hardener on there, which I think is 206, I'm not sure, but use the slow hardener with the West epoxy system. And we also use, of course, micro balloons. Keep buying this little container, just the regular old micro balloons from Aircraft Spruce. We'll be using a lot of that. As far as tools, get yourself a large mixing bowl. The other thing you want to get yourself is somebody to help you mix epoxy. There's so much to do here. Don't try and do this by yourself. Find a friend to come over and buy him some beer or something and have him come over and mix epoxy and micro balloons for you. When I'm mixing in here, I'll put in maybe 5 or 6 squirts. The standard, just about fill this type of cup up and dump them in, and use a heavy mixing stick to get it all together. To spread the epoxy around, the micro mix around, once I get that mixed up, I use drywall knives. I think this is a 12-inch, and this is like a 10-inch or 9-inch drywall knife. And when you do this, use this on a surface, you get a wide coverage, wide broadband. We'll talk about this a little bit more. The next thing in line that you're going to be using is a Surform file. Now I like this size, I think it's 10 inches or so. It's got the round blade, and when I put it in, I put the round blade in backwards. So when you're actually using it, you're drawing it to you this way instead of pushing this way. When you push this way with the blade, excuse me, the blade isn't backwards, I use it backwards. But when you push it this way, you tend to dig in and create large divots. So you don't like to do that. So when I get it on the surface, I pull it back in this fashion. So after we've knocked off the high spots with a Surform file, then we're going to go into the sanding. And what I have made is these are 18-inch sandpaper, 36 grit, and I've made up a little board here. I put a piece of angle aluminum on the back for a stiffener, and these are sticky. You get them at auto body supply shops. Get a whole bunch of this stuff. You're going to need a whole bunch, and I just peel off the backing, stick it on there, and then I use these sanding boards, and we'll talk about that a little bit. Last but not least, we're going to use the epoxy squeegee, and I think that's about it. So basic materials, and we'll get it in a second. We'll get into the actual method of doing this. Now we're going to talk about how to actually accomplish this. All right, we're going to assume that this is now in raw epoxy. It's just this plain weave. We haven't done anything to it. So something like this right here. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do, naturally, you probably already know this, you should know this by now, is going to take up a piece of 36 grit paper and sand the shiny surface and keep on sanding it until it's all dull. So that way it'll be ready to receive the micro we're going to apply to it. After we do that, then we're going to be getting ready to mix up our micro. So what I like to do is, again, I use like a big bowl. I mix about this much at a time and dump it in the bowl, and you want to keep on stirring until you have the consistency of about peanut butter. Now make sure it's really, really smooth, no lumps or anything. Now we're gonna, as we put this on, some people like to put on a really thin coat of pure epoxy on here to improve the bond, but I did much of this without doing that, and I don't think it's really necessary. I think enough of the epoxy wicks out of the micro mixture that it turns out you don't need that extra adhesive, but that's your choice. If you do use some pure epoxy on here first, make it so thin you can't even tell that it's on there. You don't want to have anything dripping off or anything. Really, I basically recommend you do it without. Okay, so we're going to scratch everything up on the surface. You want to do one whole surface at a time. So, for instance, this wing panel here, we would do this much. Don't do anything less. Think in terms of big pieces, big sections you're going to do. And like for one session, it wouldn't be too bad at all to do this one, and you could do the other wing at the same time. First time through, I wouldn't take on too many all at once, because if you do that, if you get caught behind, you might not like it. So first time through, like pick up a wing section like this, or a wheel pant, whatever you might be working on. So after we scratch this up and we mixed our micro balloons, now we're going to put the micro balloons on the wing itself. So we better stop that for a second. So we've mixed up a cup of pure West epoxy with both the hardener and mixed the hardener with the resin and stir that up independently like you always do, and then pour in the micro balloons and stir the micro balloons up. I use the big stick, and then when it's time to actually pour it on, you know, it's going to be like this. You're going to take a big bunch and stick it down on the wing. So now what we're going to do is take our drywall knives, whichever one you feel most comfortable with, a big, wide one or not so wide, and you're going to put it in the epoxy and you're going to draw it back in big, long swipes. Now, when you put the stuff on, the micro balloons on, you're going to need a lot. We're going to put it on so it's about 1/4 inch to 3/8 of an inch thick. I mean, really thick. And what we want to do is make sure we have all the low spots covered. And so just go ahead and wrap it around, take it for the leading edge, bring it back to the trailing edge, overlap a little bit, put more on, and this is why you need to have somebody else mixing for you, because you're going to need a lot of this stuff, and it needs to keep on coming while you are pulling it with your drywall knife. So when you get all that on, you're going to have a coating on here that looks like you've put icing on a cake. Looks like you've put on too much icing on a cake, and it'll be quite high and ugly. But make sure, if in doubt, make it thicker, don't make it thinner. If you make it too thin, if you don't have your low spots filled in while you're doing this, then you're going to have to go back a second time and reapply, and then it gets ugly after that. So do yourself a favor and make it really thick. I'm sure I've made myself clear on this one by now. It's a huge deal. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to let this set for about 3 hours with the West system, of course, depending on temperature. And then we're going to want to come back and just knock down the high spots. So after you've let this set up for 3 hours, 3 or 4 hours, then come back with your Surform file, and we're just going to come through and use it in this manner. Like I say, I pull it toward me, and we're going to knock off the highest spots on the epoxy micro mixture we have up, and that'll make your sanding a lot better. So once you've done that, now you should do this within 3 or 4 hours, because when you do it later on, it becomes a lot harder. And you want to use the Surform file before you use the sandpaper, because it'll help save your sandpaper, and it just makes it work better. So anyway, so bring this down after 3 or 4 hours of cure, and then let it set overnight. Now, when you come back to this, I suggest coming back to this the next day. Don't let it set for 2 days or 3 days or 4 days or a week or something like that, because then your sanding is going to be that much more difficult. So next day, come out bright and early, or whatever that's going to be, and we're going to use our sanding boards from here on out. So in addition to the sanding board, well, we talked about the sanding board with these removable pieces of paper on them. And I also use these rubber sanding blocks you get from body shop supply stores. I've got a 6-inch, and I think this is an 8-inch, and these are also very useful. You can also put the paper on the back side for areas where you have to get some sort of a reverse curve going. But anyway, on the sandpaper, so what we're going to do is we've hit this with a Surform file. We're working on this the next day, because we don't want the stuff to be extremely hard yet. It'll still have some resilience to it, or softness. And we're going to sand full strokes on a 45-degree angle, like this. Big, broad strokes, and this has got to be a nice wide bar. If you have something small, like is actually described in the original plans, a small little thing, it's not going to come out as well. Big, broad strokes back and forth, and you're going to keep on sanding all the way until you come down to the fiberglass. Now what you're doing with this board is you're establishing the form of your airfoil. Okay, so it's going to, you're establishing the form of the airfoil, and as you do this, you'll see it's good. It doesn't take all that long to do this. Maybe half an hour of sanding, and you're going to be in good shape. Be sure and change the sandpaper often. If it clogs up or it starts to get dull, don't try and save a buck or two on sandpaper when you have to spend a lot of time doing this. So what we're going to do is we're going to sand down. Well, I have a couple examples to show you here. So this is a wing, all right, and now we've applied our dry micro mix real thick here, and you can see what I've done on this one, or maybe you can see I've just hit it with a Surform file. I haven't actually started sanding it. All right, once we come down and you see glass, once the fiberglass is showing up in here, and this one this is a demo I made for a seminar one time, so I didn't go as far down as I should have, but time is of the essence. You can see a little bit of the weave showing here, but when you get down to the weave, it starts showing, then it's time to stop. And you just want to have a nice smooth thing. And again, what you're doing is you're establishing the shape, basically the final shape of the airfoil. Okay, so when you do this, when you get down to this point, now you've come to the glass, you've decided I don't want to take any more off this airfoil, this is my shape going to be. You are going to see all sorts of pinholes. You're going to see little itty bitty ones, you're going to see real big ones, some of them might be a 1/4 inch, 3/8 of an inch in diameter. There's going to be these big ugly 36 grit scratches. Don't worry about it. This is the great thing about using this method. Do not worry about it, you're doing great. So after you hit it with the 36, you've gotten down where you want, the 36 grit, then change your paper over to 80 grit and go at it a little bit more just to get your final smoothness out and get it nice. And you are done sanding now for this part of the project. It's back in the old days, fill and sand, fill and sand, fill and sand. You keep at it, but we are done now. So what you're gonna do is take your air compressor, blow all the dust out of everything, and once you're happy and satisfied that you have your airfoil shape here and we've filled up all the holes, then we're gonna go ahead and do the epoxy wipe method. Okay? We're actually gonna do the epoxy wipe method. Again, have somebody to mix epoxy for you, it'll make things go a lot better. And we have a surface that has all sorts of scratches in it, pinholes, but we have the right form of the airfoil. And again, mix up, this thing about 3/4 of the way full, and then you're just gonna pour it on the wing, and you're gonna squeegee it with your regular squeegee. And you're gonna cover everything. The first time through, it might take, for this much, it might take 3 or 4, I say squirts because I use an epoxy pump, maybe 3 or 4 squirts the first time. That's fine. You're just gonna squeegee it all over and then squeegee absolutely everything off you can get off. So you're gonna be applying it, and as you do this, you're filling up the scratches and the pinholes and the weeds. So squeegee it on, pure epoxy, nothing else in there, squeegee it off, and then let it sit for about 30 minutes. Come back and do it again. So at that time, you're going to be using less epoxy. Now, let's say for this section here, we used 4 measures of epoxy to fill this. When you come back the next time to do this in 30 minutes, it's only going to take you maybe 2 measures of that epoxy. So it's going to be a lot less. The first time fills it up a lot. Wait 30 minutes, come back and do it again. And I recommend going anywhere between 3 and 6 coats. And it's not really coats, it's not a word I like to use because we're not building up the surface, we're only filling up the cracks, filling up the scratches and filling up the pinholes from inside. So 4 to 6 coats are, I just did it again, 4 to 6 applications, and then you're done. So what you have then is a surface, and I hope you can see some of this. You see all these scratches? These are the scratches made by the Surform file. These have all filled in here. Pinholes, scratches, all this stuff is now level on this. So we don't have to fill these things up. It's a fantastic method. So now you're gonna let it go ahead and sit for a couple of days before you come back. Let it harden up really well. As you're doing this, of course, make sure you don't have any drips or runs in there. If you have drips or runs, you're not squeegeeing enough off as you do it. Again, each coat you want to squeegee off absolutely as much as you can possibly get off of it. Then when Let it set for a day or two, a couple of days, and come back and hit it with 220 grit sandpaper on the board. And the 220 grit is all you need to scuff up the surface enough to take the primer. And that's it. You are now ready for painting. And if you don't believe this, try it on a smaller surface than maybe a whole wing. Like I started this the first couple of times in my wheel pants. I was so impressed with it. I said, if I ever have to do this again, I'm going to do the whole airplane. So that's the epoxy wipe method. I hope you like it. Give it a try. It works great, and I hope this was useful. Thank you.